Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to a March 14th edition of the MSP Initiative Live. And man, quarter of the year is already almost behind us. Time just flies by when you're having fun. Let me give you some housekeeping, and then we'll go into the normal jam, right? And we'll talk about all sorts of things with our special guest today, Mr. Tom Watson. So check it out. Brand new digs, mspinitiative.com, new and improved. Cool look here. So sessions, this and every other session is under the sessions tab in podcast and video format. So today's session is being recorded and will be posted a little bit afterwards. We have our Community Minds event coming up later on this year in Denver. So we're doing an in-person event where we're bringing experts from all around the community that are going to workshop you through ideas rather than a PowerPoint presentation with bullets that you never follow up with and actions that you never take. Then we have our community block parties, the first one of which is coming up next week. Hold on. That was last year's party, but we're doing one in London on Monday, this upcoming Monday, March 20th. So if you're going to be there, several events happening that week in London, let us know. We are having a party. We rented out an entire venue, posh and all London edition, but we're covering a night with a bunch of our co-sponsoring vendors here in the UK. It's the first time we've done this since, I think, 2018. There was a pandemic in between there, but I digress. So definitely join us there if you're going to be in the area. We have our community offers. So these are companies. I already got a bunch of other companies that have already said they're going to post some offers here, but here are three to start the effort. And then lastly, at the very top is our industry calendar, right? So everybody spends a lot of time trying to put all the events of the year in one place. We do the same thing. So check out our industry calendar. And if you want to add your events here, then go ahead and submit them, or you can subscribe and be up to date on everything that is going on so that you know what is happening in the sandbox. Without further ado, Mr. Tom Watson. How you doing today, Tom?
All right. Yeah, I'm doing great, George. Great to be on there again with you.
Yeah, it's been a little while. You've since switched digs, but we'll talk about it in a bit. For anyone that hasn't met you somewhere along the way, I would love to give people a little bit of your background. I love the fact that like people who have really put some work in, that you actually had an MSP, so you know what it means to actually
Yeah.
do the work. But go ahead, let people learn a little bit about you.
Well, George, our relationship goes back to when I owned an MSP. So,
That's right.
I mean,
That's
yeah.
right.
So it's kind of cool. Yeah. So yeah, I've been in the IT channel for 26 years now. So going back into the 90s, and like a lot of people probably on this call, I started out as a network engineer, network administrator, systems admin, working for various entities. And then I had the fortunate situation of working for an MSP in the 90s and really liked what I saw. And I kind of left there and went back and worked I was working for this company, a consulting task group and doing some government contracting. And I was like, you know what, that MSP thing really, I like that. I like what they were doing. And this guy I'd worked under was like a real early adopter of managed service agreements. And so I went back to him because I'd heard through someone that he wanted to like retire. He was like in his late 60s. So I went back to him and said, hey, you know, get a couple of these contracts. You ever thought about like, you know, what are you going to do when you move on? And so I actually did a deal where I bought those from him and started my business with true managed service agreements it was like 2000. So that was like very early for this stuff to
Way
happen.
early. Way
Very
early.
early. Yeah, very early. And but you know, then I started building that MSP and you know, when I got about like 2009 and went through the whole Great Recession thing, I realized I needed to convert all of my clients from all over to this managed services model, which I knew how to do, but I hadn't been really good at leveraging that knowledge. But I figured out a way to do it. I came up with some interesting things that people have seen: a cost calculator, an agreement, all that kind of thing, and I moved everyone over. Lost like 10% of the clients. That was great because the ones I didn't want. But I moved over to a full managed services model, 2009. Still pretty early to be doing that. And so I did it for a long time. Was successful enough at it that I sold my MSP in 2015 and took a brief amount of time off, did some travel, that kind of thing. And then I came back into the channel from the vendor side and have I was basically a channel chief with different title at eFolder, became Accient, and then I was at Ninja One for several years, and then I was at Titan HQ on a short-term contract last year, which I now moved into. From that, I saw an opportunity with a true visionary in the space of compliance, document management, GRC, Tim Golden, and he invited me to come on board at Compliance Risk, and that's where I am now. We are a SaaS startup, and that brings me to today, George.
Wow, that's a pretty long journey. I ran into you back in the ConnectWise user group days, right? Where we're all sitting around the table trying to figure out who the hell's doing anything that works.
Yeah.
And we that's where we really learned, who was actually doing this and who was saying that they were doing it. I feel like there was a pretty big line in the sand because a lot of people said a lot of things but weren't actually doing that. It's amazing how time flies. But I remember when we first, originally connected, you were talking about how you were rolling hardware as a service into your managed services
Oh
agreements.
yeah.
And like nobody was doing that in any large way. And at least the groups we were in. And you were like, oh, this was easy, right? And you just rolled it into your term and you co-termed it with your managed services agreement that you already had. And like all of a sudden it was like, seems easy.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about it. It's called Network in a Box. And I didn't get into the desktop hardware, but I would provide you a small business, a server, with one of the Microsoft small business platforms. And I would provide you the server with the software on it. And I'd provide you a router. And I provide you all the service wrapped around it for one price per month. And so, I mean, like I had a lot of signups that were like, wow. And also, though, as you know, George, the stickiness of that was phenomenal because I mean, I
Mhm.
owned their server. I mean, like, what are you going to do? And so, what I wanted to get away from was we had so many clients, especially the small ones, that there'd be a little glitch in service or something they didn't understand. And next thing they're calling other people, and you roll onto the network, and someone else has been looking at stuff, doing things. And so I wanted to make it so that listen, we are tied together. We're tied at the hip, and so when there's an issue, you got to call me because hey, listen, we really are tied up here. And it really worked because then clients viewed me as their lifeblood for their organization. It's funny because come full circle to today, and that's what MSPs are now to these small and medium sized businesses. They rely on them, and so I wanted to tie that in really closely. And I find that services right now that leverage that relationship are the ones that do really well today.
100%. Let me ask you a question because, come full circle, we're in 2023. It's all, but you sold in 2025. So like in 2 years, it's 10 years later. I don't know if the industry's changed that much, although
No.
obviously technology never changes, but like the business of the industry, still kind of the same. When you locked your customers into contracts, how did they get out? Did they have to wait to the end? They canceled early? Did you make them pay the balance? How did they get their stuff off your server when they wanted, like that's the hard part, right? You're restarting the whole system. Like, what was your methodology around how the agreement structure worked?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I didn't have a lot of turnover with clients, and I had the standard things in there, like you're locked in for the first year, but then I had some really easy clauses, like, hey, basically, you're not happy. I'm not going to keep you in this thing. I mean, I'm not going to court. I never went to court with anyone. I think that's the truth of most MSPs. Why would you want to? You don't want the reputation issues there in your community. Someone wanted out, I let them out. And there were times too that I wanted out. I had a handful of them over the years. And basically, even if I own their server, I'd be like, well, here's what I view its value as of now. And we're going to charge it for a month to help you transition off. And then basically, I would get them off and maybe charge them like $1,000 for the server or something like that and move them off. Did that a couple times, but the majority, I didn't have to do anything. They just stayed on.
That's awesome. Um, I love when people start in MSP land and then cross the aisle into vendor land. I think it's a lot easier to do that than the other way around, by the way, because anytime I've seen somebody start in software vendor land who offer services to MSPs, like understanding what happens in the day to day is difficult for these people. Like it takes time, right? I know you've trained a ton of people, since, on your journey in vendor land on like what the MSP experience is and like what they value and what's important to them. What was like when you went to go in to start training these people, what are like the top 2 or 3 things that you tried to get across to them that they had a hard time understanding about how MSPs function?
Oh, this would be with the end clients.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, a lot of this is pretty early because we're going back here to like 2000, and at 2000, 2010, that was kind of you had to like convince clients about why they needed an all-inclusive service because their view is kind of like coming from the days of like your TV's broken. And so you go down to the TV repair shop with your TV situationally. The subscription model of service was not really a thing then. And so you had to convince them that, no, listen, this is like insurance. And let's face it, in the US, health insurance isn't the greatest like comparison here. So you're kind of like talking about like more life insurance or business insurance and what it means for you. But then you're trying to wrap it into, it doesn't just mean reactive when there's a major situation. It means proactive. And so you had to kind of convince them like, hey, by doing things like by setting up backups and monitoring your backups, making sure the antivirus is working, and making sure that there's spam filtering, that these things are going to prevent future problems. So it was often a discussion of you need these things. And then I also found, as everyone knows, you have this full stack of items you're offering in your managed service agreement. You had to convince them, no, you can't just pick the ones you want. It's got to be all or none.
It's like, hey, charge me 25% less. I only want these things.
Yeah.
Yeah, 100%. Let's talk about your current place right now. What is the idea behind compliance risk? I love the name because compliance and risk usually go along with each other, right? You want to reduce your risk and make sure you're compliant, right? But I digress. What's the theme behind the current company you're working with?
Well, I think the theme is, and you nailed it there, George, what we are seeing and what my co-founder Tim Golden saw in the MSP space and what their clients are is that there's a serious problem hitting MSPs and their clients. MSPs are starting to hear from their insurance companies and also their clients' insurance companies, state organizations, and federal that, hey, listen, regulation is here of the IT industry. And with that,
Is it regulation or is it guidance? Has it really made it to the like? To me, I feel like regulation is like it's actually in the law, right? HIPAA or SOX or something like that, right? But like, are we talking about that stuff? Or are we talking about like the CISA guidance that just came out today on what we expect you to do, but it's not necessarily have teeth to it?
that is a good point. It starts with guidance and then it becomes regulation.
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, we now need companies like Compliance Risk to provide that additional guidance to get you towards compliance. Because the next thing is these laws go to the next point of reporting's required. Like we know a lot of states have put in requirements in terms of when there's an incident, you have to report it, and there has to be certain documentation behind that. You have to prove you have insurance. You have to prove you have an incident response plan. And so, what is interesting is the insurance companies are getting ahead of this, and they're actually have their own regulations and requirements already. And so we're hearing from MSPs that, hey, my insurance company says I have to have an incident response plan. What does that mean?
I fear that they go and copy one from somebody else, say, hey, look, I have one, and then like have no idea how to actually follow that document. I know that's how many times have you heard somebody say, hey, can I get a copy of your agreement? And then like, bad things happen because they didn't keep up with anything that was in that agreement because they didn't know what was in it because they copied it from someone. And as you know, things change, right? All these different nooks and crannies of guidance. And to your point, you're 100% right. Everything starts off with, we really strongly urge you to follow this. And then it turns into, you really should follow this. And if you don't, bad things might come. And then it turns into, yeah, we made it the law. And now we're going to come and find you, right? That's usually the path. I mean, that's what I've seen. So like, what kind of things does your platform help with? Because I will tell you this, the insurance thing is for real, right? Like before any of this stuff actually from the government, like really kicks in, the insurance thing, like I feel like then it may be a problem getting cyber liability insurance moving forward because it's becoming so difficult to deal with the renewal.
Yeah, what we're seeing is a lot of these insurance companies are saying, listen, you have to have an incident response plan. And right there, people are like, where do I get one of these? And like you said, that's not something you really want to just download off the internet. Secondly, they're saying you've got to keep this thing and you've got to have certain people in your company sign off on it, including your IT people. And then you need to maintain it and you need to update it each year. And then you need to give us eyes on it. Like once a year, we're going to want to take a look at it and make sure you have the versions, you have the sign offs, you have adopted this thing and you're following it. And so there's a lot going on there. And that's not a normal process that most companies or MSPs would be ready to tackle.
Yeah, I definitely think that, you know, to your point, implementing, following up, and then signing to it, probably a little bit more scary, right? Because now that if you're saying, hey, I've signed off saying that I know what's in this plan and I'm going to execute on it, and if I don't, then I'm the person responsible, may give people some pause.
Absolutely. It gives people some pause and it makes them wonder, wow, how am I going to get in front of this? And they reach out to what's happening a lot of times. You know, I was recently at Right of Boom trade show. You were there too, George.
That was a
Great
great show.
show. Lots of MSPs who understand security, understand compliance, and what that means. And they also see that there's also the ability to really monetize this for the MSP. And also provide more value to the clients. And the conversations we were having there is that their clients are reaching out to them and saying, I need help with this. I need to get organized. And I also need to get organized with these other things you've been telling me to do, like password policies and acceptable use policies and even employee handbooks and sexual harassment policies. That all of these things actually fall under because there's a lot more attention being paid to businesses and making sure they're compliant to a lot of different rules out there. And they need to be, the guidance is there, but the guidance from government, stops here. And then you have to have the MSP needs to provide that additional guidance to get towards compliance.
So, Tom, is it safe to say that your platform at Compliance Risk helps generate the policies, procedures, and documentation, and then allows you to actually track and follow it? Is that the theme behind what it is?
Theme behind it is, yes, that's a good summary, but basically an MSP is in there. They have full multi-tenancies. The first thing is we give an MSP, they are always free on our platform because we expect you to be compliant before you ask your clients to be compliant. So you should have your own incident response plans and associated documents, both for internal and external, up there and have sign off on them. And then we're going to provide you the recommended documents that you might need, but also if you have your own, put them up there. I talked to an MSP last week that has a 180-page like internal document that's like code of conduct, acceptable use, all these different things.
That's a very
and
big handbook.
they're breaking it into 12 separate policies and putting them on our platform so they get sign off on those. At the same time, all of their clients need incident response plans. They're going to put all those up there, and it's going to be no more of like maintaining 20 different incident response plans. We're going to provide one that's recommended. You have it edited by yourself and your attorney, and you get that up in there, and then you standardize that across your client set.
Interesting. So what's the average size of your recommended plan look like? Is it, well,
first of all,
is it 100?
We've got a basic one up there, that's like a dozen or so pages, but we have further documents. If you wanted to add to that, you could add to it as well. But we find that the incident response plans end up having to be a little bit customized for your own situation and your clients, taking into account, like for example, for your MSP, your incident response plan is going to look different than your clients because your client's incident response plan is probably going to be contacting the MSP.
Yeah, 100%. So that's cool. This is brand new. Sounds like you're onto something, right? Which is making it easier to actually create, follow, and have all this documentation in one place. But like you're talking to a lot of people now, right? Right of Boom was a great show, great example of where, they went through the theory of what the attack surface is. And like, if you haven't heard of Right of Boom, it's like, hey, the boom is the incident, right? And Right of Boom is what happens after the incident occurs. Is it remediation, incident response, reporting, that kind of thing. And then left of boom is like all the things that you do to prepare for, making sure that when an attack happens, it doesn't bleed as much, right? Because it's only a, if, or it's only not an if, a when, right? Like something's going to happen at some point. How prepared were you? Did you have everything in place ahead of time? And then does it make the back end of it on the right-hand side a little bit more palatable? Actually have their workbook that they gave out was pretty neat. Had like all of their sessions in the MITRE ATT&CK kind of program, which if you haven't looked at it, that's kind of like the standard of where, security people follow. Definitely not an expert in it by any means, but I thought it was pretty good education for somebody that, is kind of coming more from traditional IT, trying to learn the security side. But Tom, when you're talking to MSPs today, why is the security thing so gray? Like, I appreciate that not everybody has the internal resources to have what they need on staff. But why is it not a very clear, hey, if you do 1, 2, 3, you're good to go? Like back in the day when we first met up, it was like, hey, you want to start doing managed services as a business practice? You need to do this, this, and this. And, this is how you set it up. It doesn't seem to be as straightforward. Why is that?
Well, we're getting MSP is getting pulled in a lot of different directions and a lot of different messaging about, first of all, what you need to do and provide to be secure. And back in our day, like it was throw any antivirus on there. It was like AVG free, and you get away with it, and you'd be like,
AVG free. Yeah,
maybe for spam you put a little Postini and deal with the single tenancy of all that. And I mean, it was just, but that was it. You were covered. And you had a router wall, a router firewall from WatchGuard or SonicWall, and that was it. You're done. And it's just not the same game anymore, man. And we have all these vendors telling you, hey, you need this and this and this and this, and it's complex, to figure out your stack. I stopped by in my area, Channel Pro, it was on last week, and I just swung up there because I go for free for the day. And I was talking at breakfast, a couple of MSPs, and like, dude, they're running like just Bitdefender, and that's it. And I'm like, whoa. Antivirus.
Is that the modern version of semantic antivirus?
Yeah, I'm like,
set it and forget it.
I'm like, that's it, and I'm like, what else, And then, but we're being told, no, you got to have privileged access management. You have EDR, MDR. You need to have, you need to have spam filtering. You need to have this and that. And like these things it's kind of hard to understand what you need, how this wraps together, and then trying to wrap that around. Are you working in industries and verticals where there's compliance needs and requirements? Are the insurance companies viewing this a certain way in terms of what you're doing to be proactive? I mean, there's so many questions. And I think, George, like, platforms like yours and your knowledge in the space for so long, you provide some guidance to what MSPs are going to need to do.
Well, one thing's for sure. I've started to hear from multiple parties that the insurance companies have it's almost like I don't know if marketplace is the right answer, but like as a security solution or a software vendor, you can go through the insurance company's validation process so that you can get on an approved list. And then that way, when you're going through the questionnaire, if you're already on the approved list, it cuts down on a bunch of extra work that you have to do because you've already been vetted. That's definitely happening right now. And like maybe even a year or 2 years ago, I didn't think that was happening.
No, it's not. I mean, they're absolutely right. We are now getting at, and it's interesting, the insurance companies, are profit based. And so they have an incentive to be on this and provide regulations of their own and guidance for it before government. Government moves a lot slower, but these insurance companies, they lose serious profits when there's a bunch of incidents and they're paying out. So they are really incentivized to deal with this, and I think what you're seeing is they are on top of it.
We had a smart guy from a law firm, Scott and Scott, last session, and he had said that the one thing he tells his clients is the worst case scenario is when the insurance company refuses to do anything with the claim, like to deny the claim. Like usually, he's like, hey, I like to fight the claim on behalf of my customer. Sometimes they'll let us do that. Or, hey, we can, be part of the negotiation process so they don't pay out on things that we know we're going to win. But how about they don't even get to that point? They just deny your claim altogether. Then like you really have no safety net underneath of you.
No, absolutely, and that's a big problem. I'm hearing about incidents like that. I'm also hearing about MSPs just unable to get cyber insurance. I mean, what do you do there? I mean, to me, it starts. I think you then start to have to look at the guidance of first of all understanding why you weren't able to be insured. What do you need to change in your organization and demonstrate that you have the ability to protect your clients and guide them and be safe. And so to me that starts coming up with platforms like what I'm offering is, hey, this is one where you can show, hey, we have a system of managing these policies, of getting sign off, of making sure they're adhered to. It's a part of what you need to provide as a managed service provider, not only to your end clients, but within your own organization. And the companies that get on top of this and have a structure around how they're providing security and reporting on it are the ones that are really going to do well because it's just the beginning. We know that, George.
I kind of feel like everybody always gets scared when they talk about car insurance, right? Because nobody ever wants a claim on their record, because if they do, then their rates go up, or if they go to shop, their rate somewhere else pops up as part of your history, right? And then, they ask about how many tickets you've gotten and all that other jazz. How many people have insurance and they're like scared to even file a claim for risk of A, they'll get dropped, or B, they'll skyrocket their premium the year after.
Absolutely. Yeah. And one big mistake and you're not getting insured, or that rate goes up to a point where it's not affordable for your business. And we all know a lot of the smaller MSPs out there are getting the squeeze already on that. And then you're either out of business or you're having to sell, maybe for not what you wanted. I mean, these are things where you've got to be ahead of it. I mean, George, I was wondering if you heard about this. I was on a couple of weeks ago with Tim Golden, co-founder, and he was part of a webinar with CompTIA
Hmm.
and Wayne Selk, and they were and Wayne mentioned that there is going to be full regulation of the MSPs in the UK within the next year. Like they're going to be
Hmm.
licensed. You don't have to be licensed to be an MSP. And my kind of takeaway from that was if that happens there, it always seems like the Europeans, and that's of course UK separate from the Eurozone, but they always seem to be kind of on top of this kind of compliance stuff like here, and those things are happening over there, and we seem to follow like we saw with GDPR. I mean, have you heard about this going on? What do you see coming out of that?
Honestly, Tom, I had not heard that. I'm going to be at IT Nation London next week. I'm going to ask this question. I would love to understand what this looks like, because you're right. People copy each other. We talked about MSPs copying other MSPs' documentation. Don't do that. But the governments definitely share their work. I would love to understand what the program looks like and how do you get approved for the licensing, and like what's the process and how much does it cost, and like, because like there's a lot of professions here that are licensed, right? Lawyers have to be licensed, doctors have to be licensed, pharmacists have to be licensed, plumbers have to be licensed. But you're right, there is no licensing for IT services, at least not now. So like I would be curious, but also a little bit worrisome that whatever this program looks like. I'll ask and hopefully come back with some answers next week.
Yeah, George, that's something I think about a lot because I remember as an MSP, yeah, I went and I was a Microsoft certified systems engineer, and I went to grad school for a related topic, but no one made me pass a test. No one made me register with a government entity, and I just hung my shingle out there and started doing business. And hey, that might be for some of us who really went through the work and we know how to do it, but we're not. Doesn't mean we're all following the same standards, especially now with the security. And at the same time, like, listen, man, if you're a plumber to come to work on the toilet of your house, you got to be certified and licensed and insured. Whereas I can go work at your business on your computers and arguably do much more damage without any licensing. So we know where this is headed. It's headed in that direction.
I'm concerned, like usually, like I don't know how it is in your town, but in my town, if you get a permit from the town, borough, city, whatever, they ask who your contractor is if you're not doing the work yourself, and then they ask them for proof of insurance. But you
Yeah.
just said you're hearing MSPs are getting denied insurance policies altogether. So if you can't get insurance, then how do you maintain your license? How do you get your permit?
Yeah, you're right. Once they tie the licensing to the insurance and you're unable to get insured, then you're unable to carry a license. And I think that's, listen, the way direction things are going, I'm sure that's coming. And this all goes back to being prepared for these things coming. We know they're coming. We know things like FTC safeguards is coming. That's going to hit some MSPs. It's
Hmm.
certainly going to hit some MSPs clients. And then when
FT,
it does,
can you talk about what that is? FTC safeguard?
yeah, so Federal Trade Commission is putting some rules into place, and we're actually publishing an article tomorrow about this. And there'll be a LinkedIn post, and it'll be on the compliancerisk.io website. But talking about how this can impact MSPs and their clients. But basically, just to sum it up, if you are doing credit and you're providing goods or services on credit, you may be subject to FTC safeguards. You're going to have to check. And right now, there's guidance. It's a little hard to figure it out, but you need to start understanding whether you're going to be. And like if you're an MSP that maybe is selling computers and offering them on credit or pay off over time, you might be subject. Not saying you are, but these are things you need to take care of. This goes into place in the summer of this year.
Hmm.
And we're going to have to pay attention to these things. And what follows these kind of rules by like the Federal Trade Commission and stuff like that, what follows those is there's guidance about it, and then there's laws that come. Now we've told you you need to be compliant. Now here's laws you have to adhere to, and if you're not, there's fines. That's the way this stuff rolls down. Just like we see, like, well, they're supposed to be in the financial world, but we know how that actually works out.
I
But
mean, let's
yeah,
actually talk about that right now because like it's literally topic of the day. In the last like 72 hours, something like 30 banks have literally like defaulted on the fact that they don't have enough to pay back their depositors. Um, I thought everything was a little bit more stable, but maybe not. So I guess the last time we saw this type of thing happen was 2008, 2009, right?
well, yeah. I
And
mean,
that
yeah,
was a bad time. Banking and insurance are usually tied, Tom. Let's be honest.
yeah,
So, like, what
absolutely.
happens if your insurance, the entity that you're going through, is tied to a bank, and that bank becomes insolvent? Like, that's not a good story if that ends up being the case.
George, it's frightening that after 2008, we now have, SVB is the second largest bank in U.S. history to fail because there was one in 2008 that failed. I mean, and we both know it's even scarier from the perspective of tech companies because that's their primary business
Yeah.
was tech company deposits. And I mean, frightening. I heard this morning that Roku had a standard business checking account with like $430 million in it. Like, guys, that's
Wow.
like they're lucky the government's bailing that out because that would not be subject to FDIC like reimbursement right there.
430 million. Yeah. What's FDIC? 250,000?
Yeah, yeah. Like, what a count. I mean, like there's some practices going on that it's like it's scary that these things are allowed to happen and that we're still seeing these things go down. I mean, what's up with this? Who is over watching over this stuff? These things happen. I mean, we had the Madoff scheme. We've got we've got the crypto with Sam Bankman-Fried, FTX. We've got this. I mean, these are frightening things happening. And my belief is that you need to actually watch out and you need to protect yourselves and your clients. You need to put in place your own rules based on the guidance out there. And then you need to institute these things so you're protecting.
Yeah. On the banking front, like, obviously, a lot of investment money comes through, some of these new banks that have popped up. So have you noticed? I mean, I'm sure you have a lot of email accounts, Tom. I've probably gotten 14 different emails from just vendors I had no idea that had anything to do with it saying, hey, we're okay. There's no issue. You don't have to be concerned. I'm like, I didn't even know that there was a problem. Why are you emailing me about this whole banking thing that's happening over the last couple of days? So clearly this is a little bit more wide reaching than we thought.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, like, I think tech companies are getting hit with these questions. I mean, the government, fortunately, has stepped in. I don't really like the precedent of it because I think it gets these bankers already start thinking, oh, well, who cares about the insurance and stuff like that? The government, too big to fail. We're going to step in there. And I'm sure a lot of tech companies are getting hit with this question of how are you impacted by this? Do we have to worry about our doing business with you because you're going to have problems getting your money? And then, like, George, what's next? I mean, SVB goes down. Listen, there's a lot of other entities that are smaller than SVB that are relying on SVB to function. What's going to happen there? Are we going to get a cascading effect like we saw with FTX? because this is likely to happen.
I am definitely concerned. I mean, we usually don't ask about banking relationships when you start shopping for vendors, let's be honest. Or even insurance policies. They're like, hey, what bank's backing your insurance,
Yeah.
policy? You just don't ask those questions. Maybe we have to start doing that. But bottom line is, even in the own operation of the MSP's funds, maybe you need to spread your funds around so that it's not all in one bank. Probably makes it a little less convenient, but that way, if one entity goes down, you don't have all of your assets in one place.
Yeah. I mean, it makes me want to think about like start stuffing cash in my mattress or something.
Well, until the place burns down, which you hope doesn't happen. But yeah,
Well,
I got you. It's an interesting time. We talked about 2023 potentially being like a financially not great year. I mean, it's March. We're only like not quite 90 days into the year. It's happening. Um, what's your just give me your best guess. MSP land going to be okay, or are we going to see a 2008 style effect this year?
yeah, I like to think there's more protections in place, but then that's completely blown out of the water when I see this SVB thing just crumble. And like, apparently this stuff started happening, in early February, but we just started getting, I mean, when did the news start coming out about this? Like a week ago?
Not even
And
4 days. Yeah.
yeah, frightening. And like I always think there's protections in place looking out for us, but let's face it, these regulations are not well imposed. As soon as you get the SEC involved and Federal Reserve, they're not looking out for you and I. They're looking out for the big corporations. Like that president of SVB was a member of the Federal Reserve. I mean, come on. What
I
is
was
this
on one
stuff?
of the boards for one of the Federal
Yeah,
Reserve boards.
come on. Yeah, I mean, yeah. He of course had to get off of that board. But I look at these things and I go, how are MSPs going to be affected? I see there's got to be some cascading effects because how far is the government going to go to bail out every entity that was dependent on SVB, so other financial institutions? There's going to be carnage at some level from this, and that carnage could include vendors that MSPs use that are maybe dependent on some bank that was dependent on SVB for transactions or had funds through a subsidiary or a bank that was then invested in SVB. And so I got to think that at some level we're hit. But ultimately, because MSPs live in this small business space, we're still going to have business. We're still going to have our clients calling us, and we're still going to get paid. But I got to think this all ends in some kind of economic downturn further this year, that either with the stock market, bonds, or interest rates getting worse. Of course, the SVB thing comes off of the increase in interest rates and the bonds, and so there's going to be some kind of effect that comes out of this. It's going to be negative for business in general. I don't know what it is, George, but I've got some concerns myself.
Well, I'm not trying to be conspiracy theorist or negative guy. I'm just trying to look big picture, right? If the banking industry is affected, we know the stock market's already been in flux because cost of goods and interest rates and all that stuff. Those two things usually collide with investment, right? PE, VC investors, right? So we already know that they're starting to tighten the screws, right? Because the money's not free and cheap anymore, right? It's getting more expensive to actually generate, right? So in my opinion, that's where it probably hits first. So when you add the pressure on the investment side of things, adds pressure onto the people who take those investment dollars, right? A lot of them, some of them in our space, right? And then that usually means something has to change from that side. So whether you're an MSP who took money and started acquiring other MSPs, or you're a vendor who services MSPs, something has to give there between the stock market and banking industry getting crushed. And then on the government side, kind of where we started, Tom, if all of these new rules and regulations, usually people qualify that as a tax, compliance tax, regulation tax, right? So if those new rules and new things that you have to do are coming in, combined with the financial side of things from the other side, like who's in between both of those things? The MSP.
Yeah, service providers, absolutely, because there's a squeeze. What you're saying is that when you get insurance, now you get interest rates, Now you get government regulations, new laws, licensing and fees and reporting, and these things come together. It immediately there's at a minimum there's overhead in terms of your organization to manage those situations. Then there's going to be fees with insurance and increased insurance. If you've got any money that you're taking out to operate, or you're buying things with, and then it's on credit, well, we know those interest rates are higher, and then we know you're going to have to be licensed, and licensing costs money. And
Mhm.
so eventually, like, these things start to compound, and it becomes, are you charging enough to pay to make the difference?
And that's where you come back to, we talked way back in the day. One of the things that I hope everybody's implemented at this point, if you haven't, think about it. Automatic increases contractually annually, right? Instead of me coming back to you saying, hey, I might have to raise my rates. It's like, hey, it's in there, right? Every year, 3 to 5%, right? That's what we
Yeah,
did way back in the day. But like, does the 3 to 5% cover all of the things we just talked about? Probably not.
probably not now. I think you got to, I mean, honestly, we all like within the managed service agreement level. And, we did some great webinars about my cost calculator and my managed service agreement back when I was at Ninja. And, and the fact is I had back in there, I had rehashed an old agreement from, like, I wrote in the 2000s. And back in there, I had this clause, and I made sure I went over with every client, like automatic increase. I usually did 7 to 10%. I think you're over
Wow.
10% now per year. I think you are. And the fact is that you probably need to protect yourself further in these agreements now, in terms of clauses that are like overages in extreme situations that are outside of your control. Like, hey,
There's a
listen,
key word, outside of your control. There's a lot that's not in your control.
there is. There's more than ever. It used to be, like you said, we went out there, you needed service. We rolled in a server, we rolled in a router, we sold you some PCs. Good to go, man. You minimal software. But now it's so much more, and you've got to be. I look at more as an MSP. You need to be more. You have to have a business consulting level to you, and you need to be able to look at the business and where they're exposed for multiple levels, and where also at the same time you have to look at your level of exposure all the time, and you need to balance those two and make sure that you're charging enough here for the overhead you're getting with the insurance and all the government regs that are here as well.
I will definitely dig in more into this licensing thing in the UK. There's something to that, Tom. I'm, better to learn ahead of time than to find out at the last minute. I usually things take time to matriculate across the pond, but if they are going to start licensing IT and managed services companies, I want to understand what's involved there. But there's obviously not going to be free.
No, that's for sure.
It's definitely interesting to see how I'm seeing maybe more MSPs work together than I've seen ever.
Yeah.
Right. Back in the day, I feel like by the time me and you ran into each other, still a fair bit of castle mentality, right? Hey, your competitor. I can drive to your area. Yeah, it's like, come on, dude. But now today it feels like that's starting to vanish a little bit. And like people are like, hey, I don't have this area covered. You have that area covered. Maybe we can work together and do this, and this. And like, I'm seeing way more of that type of dialogue at these events than I've probably heard in the last 5 years combined.
Yeah, there's a lot more collaboration, and I think part of that is that, and I think we both learned this. I mean, I know you still have your MSP, so you actually have this test board, and you're able to take experiences now. But I noticed in the last few years of my MSP, I started to realize I'm strong in this vertical, I'm strong in this vertical, this one not so much. And specialization was really important. And I think a lot of MSPs, especially the mature ones, go, you know what? I'm going to play in this sandbox, in this sandbox. This one over here, I'm not gonna. And then what's great about that is it opens up the ability to work with other MSPs more, especially in your area, because you can go, hey, we do law firms, we do accounting firms, we do professional services, but we don't do medical, or we don't do finance because we're not up on finance, because there's all of these compliance rules, and we're not experts in that, so we'll send it to someone who is. And I think that's really become an area that's become much more opened up as the MSPs realize, figure out your lane and stay in it to some degree.
I know, Ken Patterson, good friend of the show, when he was working back in MSP in Boston, when he decided that a customer wasn't a good fit for him, he would actually recommend them to another MSP across town as a landing spot. And more than often, that actually ended up happening, right? So back to your point, like referring business that fits the lane that people are in. I feel like back in the day, that didn't happen so often. Maybe people are more open to that now.
No, we signed up everyone. I mean, you went IT service. It was like, it was like, here you go, one size fits all, and then we'll figure it out as we go. But I don't think you can do that anymore. I think your liability gets too high
Yeah.
if you start jumping into verticals where you don't understand like the requirements on them from the government, from insurance. You don't understand their business model, and so you put yourself at a minimum, you put yourself in a liability in terms of your operation to be able to service them. And secondly, I think you put yourself into legal, a legal situation potentially or insurance situation. So you really want to figure out as an MSP, what am I strong at? What are my strengths? What can I service the best? And what is my highest profitability with certain verticals? And really stick to those. Because then also, you know what I like about that, George? It strengthens your ability to market and sell because
Yeah.
you're not all over the place.
Well, then it takes a little bit less learning curve on your people, right? To like figure out how to treat customers differently depending on whatever their situations is versus you're already familiar and standardized in the areas that you're playing nice in. So to some degree, back to you end up spending time in areas learning on the job. And like, I know we did a lot of that back in the day, but like, it's probably not the best way to do it.
No,
I mean,
absolutely
I'm
not.
all for learning, but now with reasonable risk, and I think that's the main word, right? Liability and risk now have to be part of your decision making process.
No, that's a big difference. The way you say it like that. I back in the day, in the 2000s and up to 2015, I was just considering like who can I sign up? Who's going to pay? Can I reasonably address their needs? Let me do this. And now you kind of got to enter this like, well, not only can I address their needs, but am I going to put myself in a situation, or am I going to put that client in a situation where they're going to be questioned about these services? Because especially in that security realm, are their requirements as an industry, do those line up with what I can deliver to them from a security perspective?
I gotta think the answer is, it depends. But if they are in an industry where they're going to get audited, they need to do like SOC 2 style compliance. They're going to be asked by their upstream contractors, that they're meeting certain requirements in order for them to be able to do business. I mean, we probably didn't ask any of those questions back in 2010. We were just like, yeah, how many computers do you have? Oh, you have two servers? Yeah, sign here.
Yeah, we had the formula.
I mean, I got to be honest with you. Back then, I did not ask those questions. Now I think it's worth asking those questions just because you may pass.
Yeah,
You may decide it's not worth it.
I might have the PETA tax. I'd apply to the given one client here or there, but it didn't take into account the industry they were in or compliance, regulations, insurance, all that kind of scrutiny. And like we know, you get into finance. I mean, wow. I mean, like the requirements in that are kind of like daunting, I think, to a lot of service providers out there. Like, am I going to be able to service that and not get called to the mat on this? And I think you might. I think you might. You take on the wrong one. I think you can put your business in jeopardy as well.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that a lot of MSPs aren't finding themselves in the court cases often, but to your point, you're trying to stay out of there at all costs, right? Just because you know how much time investment it is to do anything like that. But what happens if you get dragged in because your customer has to go to court?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, like, well, imagine like your customer has like an insurance claim because they have a cyber incident, like a ransomware. And now the insurance company says, yeah, but you didn't vet your MSP properly and they didn't do these basic things that we told you they need to be doing. Now what's going to happen now is that client of yours, they're going to sue you because they're going to
Yeah.
want your insurance to cover their ransomware incident where they lost data and time and whatever. Now you're in a real situation.
I mean, that's probably not a crazy concept. I bet you it is happening. I
Oh
bet
yeah,
you.
I believe it is. And at that point, you're being dragged into court, and you've got to prove that you were doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. Isn't definitely not the same time. It's different. The business of technology is still relatively the same. I think the liability and the risk is much different. I think security is definitely, when we talk about it so much for a reason. Um, this whole licensing thing that could be looming, like I said, I'm going to dig into that. That's something that could be interesting. Um, how much do you, I mean, at this point, MSPs have to be outsourcing way more now than they did back in 2010. I mean, they just
Oh yeah.
100% have to be.
Yeah, yeah. It's no longer just rolling out the services and then you have a couple of cloud-based services. We're now MSPs are now operating primarily off cloud-based services. The servers have gone away for the most part. You're relying on platforms. You're paying. I'm always astonished by how many different services the average MSP is paying for in a month, and how many you have to roll those things in and make sure you still charge enough per seat to make a profit. And so you have to take that into account, but then you also have to take your liability into account and all these other things you didn't have to pay for 10 years ago. Cyber liability insurance on your MSP. And if you've had a previous incident, well, they're gonna ding you on that and charge you even more because just like with car insurance, you get a couple of tickets or accidents, you're not paying the same next year. I mean, you're paying more. And that is how do you continue to make a profit on that? And I'll tell you, I think the answer to that is that understanding what your risk is from the beginning, that you're likely to have to deal with an insurance company or a government regulation, either from your MSP or from your client at some point. Understanding you have to report an incident in your state, what those laws are, understanding what FTC safeguards is going to mean for you and your clients, and then making sure when you go and position a managed service agreement to a prospect, you take all these things into account and you tack some on to what that's going to cost per month to be able, because you're insuring yourself from what could happen.
I wish the IT industry could do what the talent, yeah, the band and artist industry does, right? Which is plus plus, right? It's like, oh, here's our booking fee, plus plus. And you're like, what does plus plus mean? It's like, oh, travel and hotel and airfare. And you have to have certain, they have a rider, right? Of all these additional things. I almost feel like the MSP industry almost needs to be like, oh, and by the way, any costs that are associated with X. Um,
I hadn't thought of it that way, George, but maybe you need to look at it and go, hey, and if you have an incident, a cyber incident, because let's face it, most of these cyber incidents come from a user on the network clicking on something. If you have a cyber incident, you know what? Automatic X number of $1,000 to address that cyber incident. Period. I got to think. You got to start. Is this something you got to consider if you're an MSP?
Excluding the cyber incident, charging that professional services separately. Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, I think you got to because otherwise you have an incident and all of a sudden you spend an extra 40 hours that month and your resources, and that takes away from your other clients. You might lose other clients because an incident at one client. You probably need a protection in your agreement and go over this very clearly with them. You have an incident where one of your users does one of these things and it brings ransomware in, and we're dealing with now something that was self-inflicted. Well, now that no longer falls under the standard agreement. That's over here, and we're going to bill you.
It's kind of like back in the day when like some people would include projects, some people would not, right? They would say,
Yeah.
here's the service agreement. Projects are going to be quoted separately versus, oh, it's all inclusive. But then, when you had a major kind of like refresh or something, you knew you're going to lose that month, right?
Oh yeah, yeah. I always had a really hard time, George, with especially I could do it with the very large clients because they were paying big money. You get up around
Right.
like $10,000 a month. Yeah, you know what? I can squeeze a project to two projects a year with a server upgrade, but the smaller ones, no, I tried it. I tried it and got in trouble with my numbers. And I found that like with clients below a certain threshold per month, I needed to charge for that server upgrade. I need
Cool.
to mention in the agreement I got to charge maybe a reduced rate.
Or some people, what they did was they said, hey, anytime we replace your primary device, laptop, desktop, whatever, there's an actual one-time fee associated
Yeah, like
outside of.
150. So we're at least getting something on that because you've got certain users on on the network on the client that the free refresh needs to happen more often, or they want a new computer every year. Like same thing, they get a new convertible every year. People like that. And so you had to watch yourself on those kind of things. I agree. I agree. It's important to look at these things. What is going to hit you and make sure you're prepared and you get with your clients and they know what's going to cost them, so you're not dealing with these things like when they occur. Everyone needs to know what they're going to pay. They need to understand their liability. They need to understand they're probably going to get hit with ransomware at some point, or some other kind of intrusion, but there has to be a shared cost on that.
Yeah. Well, I think the main idea out of all of this is ahead of time, preparation, conversation, agreement, all of these things need to be hashed out. I'm not saying you can't like deal with an unexpected something, but the more you get out of the way ahead of time, the less painful those conversations become. Tom, where do people find out information on compliance risk?
Our main website is compliancerisk.io. It's actually the name of the company too. We are interested. Our software is self-serve. Go.compliancerisk.io. Your MSP is always free. It's only $99 for your first two clients and your MSP, and first month is free for the entire trial. And it's self-serve. But if you want more information, hit me up on LinkedIn. I type in Tom Watson Compliance Risk.io. You'll get me. Drop me a DM and I'll get with you. I can show you the platform and talk to you how you can make your business and your clients compliant.
Awesome. For anyone that's going to be in the UK next week, looking forward to catching up with you guys. It's been not so long, but definitely looking forward to IT Nation London over there. And for everybody else, Tuesdays, Thursdays, 1 o'clock Eastern time. Yeah, even while we're over there, we'll still be following that. And of course, we're recording these, we're putting them up online. And stay tuned for some other announcements throughout the year that are starting to bubble up to the top. Tom, thanks for jumping on today. Talk to you soon, my friend. Everyone else, have a great week.
Out.